Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Animus Corporation, providing insulin delivery products for people living with diabetes and part of the Johnson & Johnson Diabetes Care Companies. And by Dexcom. Take control of your diabetes with the world's first continuous glucose monitoring system that sends glucose readings directly to your compatible smart device. Live life on your own terms with Dexcom. Hey, it's Stacey. This podcast is not intended as medical advice. I am not a doctor. You know that. If you have those kinds of questions, please contact your healthcare provider.
This is Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
This week, living and thriving with type 1 diabetes for 75 years. My guest today was diagnosed in 1941. Judy Ball has seen incredible changes in diabetes management. There was a time before home monitoring when doctors weren't even sure people with diabetes could be trusted to check their own blood sugar.
I went back to Dr. Williams and I said, here's my report. I went out to lunch. I checked before, I checked after. And he was so excited that this had worked. He picked up the phone in my presence and called a doctor friend. And the first words out of his mouth were, I told you they could learn to do this.
We'll talk about how World War II affected her initial care, her doctor's connection to Banting and Best, the scientists who unlocked the key to insulin, and how her great-nephew, who also has type 1, helped her change up her routine. Plus, a follow-up on last week's guest, Broadway performer Maddy Trumble, and a little bit about our school play experience. It all starts now on Diabetes Connections. Welcome to Diabetes Connections. I'm Stacey Sims. I am so glad that you joined me again for another week. Here on the podcast, we try to inspire and educate, sharing stories of connection, talking to people who are doing extraordinary things while living with type 1, as well as ordinary people just getting through day by day with diabetes. I try to bring you technology updates, talking to the companies and people behind the most recent advances, and giving you more chances to weigh in as well through our community connection or just contacting me, Stacey, Stacey, at diabetes-connections.com. Hard to believe we are at the end of November. This year is flying by. And of course, that means the end of Diabetes Awareness Month, but it doesn't really end here. Every month is Diabetes Awareness Month on Diabetes Connections. But I'm doing something really fun and new for me. Next week, December 6th, I am going to be hosting a Twitter chat with DCDE, and those are the great folks from Diabetic Connect, and they are a social network. They're a website, much more than that. They have discussions and they have news stories. They're at diabeticconnect.com, and of course I'll link that up at my website as well. And the chat that we're going to be doing is all about the pressure for perfection. And I don't really mean in as you manage your diabetes, but I mean as a parent, there seems to be this growing concern over the last couple of years about maintaining absolute flat lines. You know, when you look at a CGM, when you look at a Dexcom or the Medtronic CGM, about really maintaining perfection when it comes to the kids and not making wrong decisions ever. And so I want to talk about that because I find that very difficult to live up to. There is a reason why, as you listen to this podcast, you'll notice I don't give a lot of management or dosing or what I would consider doctor level advice because, it's been 10 years that we've been dealing with type 1 diabetes, just about 10 years. And while I will say we've had times in my son's life where I feel like we have got this, and it was mostly the times when he was younger and I controlled everything he ate and everywhere he went, and I was the pancreas. But there's been a lot of times when I feel like we don't know what we're doing even after all this time. So I want to talk a little bit about that because really when it comes to parenting a kid with diabetes, I really feel like there are as many ways to parent as there are to parent a kid without diabetes. And when we compare each other and we have this crazy standard, we all want our kids to be as healthy as possible, right? But I do think that there is this pressure that is, makes it a little more stressful than it has to be. So we'll be talking more about that during the chat, and I'll link that up as well. But I'm really excited to take part. I'm thrilled that they asked me. Quick word from our sponsor. I want to tell you a little bit about Animus. You know, I love working with Animus, and it has been 9 years that we have used their products. I love Benny's Animus insulin pump. I met a lot of you recently at the JDRF walk out in LA, and I'm going to be going to the one in Naples, Florida coming up. You know, it's great to hear why so many of you love the Animus experience as well. They offer a choice of insulin pumps, so you can choose the one that's right for you or for your child. And with kids, it is great that the Animus pumps really fit an active lifestyle. I love talking about our experience with Animus. They make it easy with great products and incredible customer service. To find out more, just go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Animus logo. In the last couple of episodes, I have been talking about how Benny, my son who is in 6th grade now, has taken part for the first time in a big school play. He did something at camp this summer, but this was the first time that he really had to balance school and the big musical and auditions and all the time it takes, and Tech Week where the kids are there till 9:30 at night. And we wanted to try, of course, to not let diabetes get in the way of not only the performance, but, just how he felt during the day and how he felt during the performance and that sort of thing. It worked out really well. And of course, there were bumps, but it worked out pretty well. During the first dress rehearsal, we just lowered his basal at that time of day. And I lowered it for the rest of the week because I knew it was basically the same thing. The performances were at the same time. So starting with the dress rehearsal, we went down a couple of clicks on the basal, which is so easy to do with the Animus pump. And then he was instructed by me to check his blood sugar 20 minutes before the show. And at intermission, he had low stuff, but we really just expected him to go high. And the goal wasn't to get a flat line or to be perfect, as I alluded to earlier during the show. It was to be safe and happy and feel good so that he could perform, knowing that he'd probably go high because of all the adrenaline, as many of my friends had told me. So, of course, right before the first performance, I looked down at the share on my phone, at the Dexcom share, and he's 90 with a diagonal arrow down. And I'm thinking, do I run backstage? Do I become that mom? Oh, my baby, help him! And so I didn't. I behaved myself. I trusted him to take care of it, and he did. Or something happened because the line started turning around. And the best thing, though, was that during the show, I couldn't look at the share because the cell signal was terrible in the theater. And we knew that, so he had his receiver backstage, the Dexcom receiver. We have a G5. So that means, if you're not familiar with it, with the G5, you can go directly to the phone from the transmitter worn on the body, or you can go from the transmitter to the receiver, which is basically what the older models had, just the receiver. So we are using both right now. We've put the receiver away in the past. But for the show, with a lousy cell signal, he had the receiver with him. So I knew he could see it, and I knew it was set with an alarm that was going off. I set the alarm for 95, which is higher than we usually keep it, but for the performance, that's how I wanted to have it for him. So he did great. He went up. He stayed pretty level during the whole show, and great levels. We talked about it afterward, and he had seen the alarm. He had actually taken some low treatment, some Gatorade gummies or something he had backstage, even before I had seen that number, 20 minutes before curtain, so good to go. The next show was fine. He started out a little higher, but the third performance, and I had to go see this show every time. I mean, yes, that's what we do as parents, right? So if you want to know how Elf the Musical is, I can probably sing you every song. It's very cute, by the way. But before the third performance, my phone started alarming. He was 60, steady arrow. And now I'm thinking, okay, I really have to get a message to him in a way that he's not going to be embarrassed in front of his friends. I can't text him because, as I said, the signal's really cruddy. I know he's going to take care of it, but I don't know he's going to take care of it. Well, there's another kid in his school. There's a bunch of kids. There's 7 kids in his school who have type 1, but there's another kid in the cast. He's on the tech crew who has type 1. So I found Miles, and I said, Miles, I need you to do me a favor. Can you go tell Benny that he's 60 if he doesn't know and hasn't treated yet, and he needs to take care of that before the show? And Miles was on it. And I was thrilled because if you tell somebody else, even a kid or an adult, there's a good chance they're going to freak out, right? And find him or pull him out of the show or do something crazy. But Miles knows that this is not a big deal, and he just needs to get a message to Benny. So I was so excited. It worked out great. Nobody was embarrassed. I actually don't know if he had already treated for that, but it doesn't matter because he treated. The show was great. And then the very last performance, he felt low, and he didn't check because he's a doofus 11-year-old. He said, I just felt low, so I took 20 grams of carb before the show. And of course, he was like 250 to 300 the whole show. But he had so much fun. He was in the ensemble. He had a couple of lines, a couple of songs. It was so much fun. And he enjoyed it immensely. So that's the long story about the show. And I also wanted to tell you about what happened with Maddy Trumble. Maddy Trumble is the fabulous young woman I spoke to last week. She is a Broadway performer, and she's been in national touring companies as well. And if you heard the show last week, and I highly recommend you go back and listen to it because she's just so much fun, we talked about the Dexcom. In fact, I think I said something to her like, I'm not doing a second commercial for Dexcom. But I wound up talking to her about it, and she sent me this email. This is what Maddy sent me earlier this week. Hi, Stacey. I started on the Dexcom yesterday, and in less than 24 hours, it has changed my life. I wanted to give you the update. All of a sudden, I'm proud to be diabetic again, and I am so happy to show it off. I also haven't been above 250 all day. That hasn't happened in years. Thanks for giving me the final push I needed to get it. Can't believe I've lived so long without it. Hope you're well. Looking forward to listening to the podcast. Best, Maddy. How about that? I'm so happy for her. But it stinks because if you listen to the show, she's probably going to lose her health insurance at the beginning of next year if she doesn't get a long-term gig. And you know how that can be in the theater with ups and downs. So let's send our best to Maddy. And she's on Twitter as well as Maddy Trumble. And I'll link that up. But gosh, let's send her some good wishes and let her know that we're thinking about her. And how cool is that she just started on the Dexcom and that she's seeing improvement? Is it too cheesy to do the Dexcom sponsorship here? All right, well, here we go. 3 years ago, when Benny turned 9, we started using the Dexcom continuous glucose monitoring system. The Dexcom CGM changed the way we looked at his type 1 diabetes. Being able to continually see and track his glucose levels on a screen has been an amazing experience. I can't tell you how much easier it makes my job as a parent to spot trends and help my son avoid extreme highs and lows right before the school play. The Dexcom G5 mobile CGM system is the first of its kind to help you monitor, track, and share glucose continuously and remotely from your compatible smart device so you can live life on your own terms. For more information, go to Dexcom.com. Talking about a Dexcom, a CGM, an Animus insulin pump, and even the insulins that we use, it is easy to lose perspective on where we have been. A great reminder of that is talking to people who were diagnosed not just a generation ago, but, 75 years ago. Judith Ball, and she goes by Judy, recently received her 75-year Jocelyn Victory Award medal for having lived with type 1 that long. And I've spoken about the Jocelyn medalists before. In fact, I talked to Richard Vaughn in September of last year. If you like this interview with Judy, I hope you go surf that up. You can go to diabetes-connections.com. There's a little box to search in. You can just put in the word Richard or Jocelyn, and his name will come up. And he had lived with diabetes as of last year, 70 years. So, this little competition going on, but it is remarkable to talk to people who have lived with it for that long and are thriving, because I think it gives us a perspective of really not only the improvements, but just the strength that these people have and the inspiration that they provide. So Judy was diagnosed in 1941, and you'll hear about the impact that World War II had on her diagnosis, on her family's experience. I mean, not everybody even had a phone in their home at that time. And this was really just a few years after not only insulin was discovered the way it was, the treatment method discovered for getting insulin out of animals, for producing it for use in people. And it was in Canada, so it wasn't even available in the United States right away. Judy encountered discrimination in her education and in her career. She speaks about that. She does have type 1 in her family. She lost older relatives to type 1 before insulin was available. And she has a great grand-nephew with type 1 now and others in her family. So it was a big thrill for me to talk to Judy Ball, and I hope you enjoy it as well. Judy, thank you so much for talking with me today. I am excited to hear more about your story.
And I'm excited to do this. I haven't done a podcast before, and I have been trying every day this year to spread the word to type 1 diabetics that you can live with it, the disease, and you can do all the things that you planned on doing. And I have lived with it for 75 years, so I'm a situation that tells it can happen, and I want you to spread the word for me. So doing this podcast will help do that.
I absolutely hope so, and we will spread the word as wide as we can. Wow, can we start at the beginning? I mean, you have such a great story and so much to say, but you were diagnosed when you were tiny at frankly, a very different time in diabetes management. To say it's different, it's almost night and day as
yes,
it is now. So I obviously you don't remember at the age of 2, but as you grew up, can you tell us a little bit about how you managed diabetes and what your parents may have told you about how you were diagnosed?
I was diagnosed in 1941. I was wearing diapers at the age of 2, and I had a sore on one buttock, and we went to the family doctor, and he took a look at it. It wasn't healing, that's why we went. And he took a look at it and probably asked other questions. I'm not sure in detail. But he did a blood test in his office, and the blood glucose was very high. And so he right away diagnosed me with type 1 diabetic and told my parents he would not be able to take care of that for me. So he sent me to a specialist in Rochester, New York, and that was probably a 30-minute, 40-minute drive at that time from our home. So I went into, and of course they didn't have titles endocrinologist back then, but he knew a doctor, Hugh Fluke, who was practicing and taking care of diabetics. And I went to him in 1941, and a few months, years possibly later, he was drafted into World War II. When I say that, it makes me feel a little older. And so he turned me over to his cousin, John R. Williams Sr., who was also helping with diabetes. And Dr. Williams was in touch with Drs. Banting and Best in Canada, who were working on producing insulin, and had already produced it, I should say that, because they did that in the 20s, and this was 41. So he had a night porter on a train from Canada bring the insulin from their lab and to Rochester, New York, and Dr. Williams would go over and pick it up. And in the U.S., it had not been okayed to be used yet.
Oh, wow.
And now this was before my time. This was before 41, okay? So when I came, I believe it had been okayed here. So I was given insulin right away, and it was beef and pork. And there's talk about that with the animals being used. But it was just tough because I was so young and I couldn't tell my parents how I felt. And I know recently, which surprised me, I ran into a former neighbor who lived across the street. And she was young at the time, and she said she remembers my mother bringing me over in her arms to her home. And her Patty's mother would take me from my mother because my mother she just said, I don't know what to do. She just cries. I don't know what to do.
Oh my goodness.
And and my parents I never remember either my mother or dad talking how difficult it was through those times. And so the injections were by syringe. And I remember at one time in early childhood, I was taking like 65 units of insulin. And right now, using an insulin pump and then Humalog insulin, I take maybe 15 to 20 units. So insulin has changed.
Before we go,
it is far better than it was.
Oh my goodness! Before we go further, though, it's fascinating to me that your doctor had that direct connection with Banting and Best.
Yes, and he used it. I know he used it with diabetics before me. There was a write-up about some man that lived in Mount Morris, New York, and he saved his life by using it. And I think he was older, maybe an adult when he got it. I'm not
Obviously,
sure.
at the time when you were being treated in that office, you didn't have the perspective, or you were a child. But looking back, it is pretty incredible to think that you are really a direct link to the inventors, the creators of modern insulin. I mean, that's not something to just shrug off and skip over.
Well, no, only through the doctor. Now, at the time that my insulin was being used in 41, it was being made in the United States. So he wasn't getting the insulin I used didn't come from Canada.
I see.
Okay, just the doctor knew the doctor earlier when they were producing the insulin before it was okay.
Got it. Okay, thanks for that clarification. I wasn't quite sure. All right, so when you said you used 65 units in injections, way back then.
That's a lot on a syringe to go into a child's leg.
I was just going to ask, was it all at once?
It hurt.
Oh,
and the needles, you had to sharpen those because you could only use them a few times. Glass syringes, and they broke. They had a little tip on them that the needle would place, attached to it. And you sterilized it yourself at home in boiling water in a pan on the stove. And the needles got toughened, and they would be, you'd had a sharpener, like you would for a knife. You sharpened the end of the needle until I'd grumble and say that that's hurting, and then they'd change a needle. And there was the only way you knew you had any high glucose or high sugar in your body was doing your urinalysis test. And that was a dip strip, and it changed color, and you compared the color on the box to what you were, and I know that if it got darkened, you were high with spilling glucose into your urine. But there wasn't the comfort we have today with the test strips and all of that.
Sure, that came much later.
So, and their nutrition boxes, they didn't have the food that you might have bought. I mean, most food then was homemade. My grandfather lived up the street with a farm, and so we had milk and stuff from that, and the ingredients to make our own butter. And I remember churning the thing and during wartime there was some kind of a little packet you drop into it to give it some color if you wanted to.
Man.
And you had your own gardens, vegetable gardens and fruit and the whole thing. So you didn't have a lot of packaged food, but even so, when you did, there was no carb count on there.
Do you think that eating that way helped keep you healthier as a child with diabetes?
Oh, I do believe, and my mother forever was saying if everybody ate the way a diabetic should eat, we'd all be healthier. And meals were made for what I could have.
And I mean, too, having that farm, having that fresh food.
Mm-hmm.
So what could you eat? What was a meal like for you? I'm sure your parents tried to keep sugar low, but as you said, they weren't counting carbs.
No, and carbs wasn't even mentioned. It was exchanges. The bread exchange for this, the potato exchange, and this kind of thing. And I don't remember any counting of anything really. I don't remember the exchange program being mentioned really, except that I think there might have been, you can have a slice of toast or cereal or whatever. It was very general, and I didn't get into counting carbohydrates till 1978.
What was your school like? Do you remember going to school?
Oh, yes. I walked to school. It was a 3-room schoolhouse. We lived in a hamlet, a very small community. And there were, at one time, there was no kindergarten. It started in first grade, and they had 8 grades and 3 rooms, so there weren't many kids in a class. We had a outdoor area to play in with swings and stuff. And the teachers, 2 of them lived right across the street. And I remember sitting I remember I always went to school with, in a paper bag, I would have a little bit of orange juice in a bottle in case I need it. And I don't remember having problems.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. Do you remember having a lot of problems? No.
I do not remember having lows as a problem. I really don't. So there I go with that. But I know I had I know I had low. I know I had terrible hypoglycemic events in the night, and I would wake up in the morning with teeth marks all around my tongue, and you would feel awful and hurt, and I would wake my parents up with the noise I was making with convulsions.
Oh no.
My sister didn't tell me until just a few years ago. I had a sister who was 4 years older, and she just told me a few years ago that she remembered that noise, and she'd put the pillow around her ears so she couldn't hear it and be praying that I'd be okay.
Oh, how scary. That feeling of powerlessness just must have been incredible.
And my parents, my father had two brothers that were diagnosed with type 1, and one died in 1922, one died in 1923. One was 8 years old and one was 21 years old. And I don't know this day because they didn't talk about it. I don't know to this day if they were ever given insulin in that year, 1922 and 23. It wasn't available in the States.
How scary.
So I doubt that they even had it. And if you've ever read books on, early children being diagnosed with it, they were kind of starved to death. They didn't eat much.
That was an awful, awful time.
Right. So my father knew about that. And then
your parents must have been terrified when you were diagnosed. I mean,
I would think it would have been horrendous. We had no phone in the house, and during wartime, you couldn't get one unless you had a very good reason for it. So they would walk down, and the doctors, of course, back then would come to your home if there was a problem, and they would call their family doctor, and he was nearby within a couple miles, and but they'd go down what would be like half a block. They would walk down and use a payphone at Four Corners to call them, and then the neighbors across the street had a phone. Okay, they had an early phone. And so if it wasn't during the night, but see, my problems would be in the night. And if it wasn't during the night, they would go over and use their phone. And finally, Dr. Hare, who was our family doctor and diagnosed the diabetes, he got in touch with the phone company, and they put a phone in for us during the wartime.
Oh, wow.
So he was the instigator of that.
Do you remember, though, as you were growing up, it doesn't sound like your parents, as you said earlier, they didn't pass that fear along to you.
No, I don't ever remember thinking. The only thing I remembered feeling that I might go blind. Somehow I knew that. But I don't remember the idea that at that age of being diagnosed, I might only live to be 20 or 30 years old. I never knew that for a very long time.
Right, because that's what they said back then.
Right, that's what they expected. Right.
So you went to school. You did pretty well. Not a lot of lows or incidents in school. As you said, most of that stuff happened at night. Did you, as you grew older, did you ever meet anybody with type 1?
There was a boy 4 years older than I who, down at the Four Corners where the payphone was, his family ran a grocery store, and they lived up in the upstairs part of the building. And he had it. I knew of him. I never knew about how diabetes was for him. And my sister was 4 years older. They were in the same class at school. But I know my parents talked about it, but I don't know how he handled his at all. And he ended up in our wedding. He was a good friend of my husband's. And he died very suddenly when he was, what should I say? I think he was in his 30s. But I didn't know anybody else, and I didn't know anybody else in school.
When you got a little bit older and started taking care of yourself, what were the challenges that you faced at that time? Because we're still talking about, let's give you 16 to 18 years after diagnosis. We're still talking about no home meters, still the same kind of insulins. Do you remember what that transition was like?
It was difficult because, I didn't always, even back then, they called me a brittle diabetic, so minor things bothered me. I didn't always realize in time to help myself that I was getting low, and it may very well have been that I was always active and busy, so I wasn't thinking about myself. And I just don't remember it being an issue until I got to college. and lived in a dorm.
Well, let's talk about that. Yeah, so where'd you go to college?
I went to a state school in Buffalo,
Okay.
New York, and I was accepted. I only applied to 2. Both of them were state schools. The tuition was cheaper. And that one in Buffalo, it was not part of the university at the time. It was SUNY Buffalo and State University at Geneseo, New York. I was accepted for both of them, and I wanted dual certification. I wanted to be able to teach elementary and junior high math. So I was in a dual program at Buffalo for 2 years, living in a dorm, and I had episodes of hypoglycemia in the night in the dorm, and when that happened, my roommate would have to wake up the hall monitor, and the hall monitor would have to wake up the head of the dorm.
Wow.
So that wasn't convenient for anybody, but they always got me through it. I don't ever remember having emergency people, from an ambulance come.
Right.
But you feel pretty lousy the next day. But and I had to eat what I thought I should eat in the cafeteria and the whole thing, and some days were busier than others, so it was very difficult. And finally, after 2 years, they called me in and said that I should go home and get things straightened out. Not those examples, but that's what they implied I should do. And so I came home, and I went to Dr. Williams, and he said, and of course we changed things around with the insulin and all of that. And so I had my driver's license, and I commuted to Geneseo. I didn't live on the campus. So I commuted for 2 years, and then when student teaching assignments came up, and we had 2 8-week assignments, with my dual program I would have 8 weeks for math in junior high and 8 weeks for elementary school. And I had those assignments given to me where I would be placed, and I went up and made arrangements to rent a room in the community because it was too far to drive. For the community that I would do the elementary part. No, excuse me, the math.
Okay.
And elementary ended up in the campus school, right on campus. The teachers working in that school were paid by the college. And you had, people coming in to check out how you were doing, and as well as the grades by the teacher whose room you were in. And I went in ahead of time and explained my situation to the classroom teacher that I was going to be in her room. And I told her I don't always, when I'm busy, I don't always realize I'm getting low. So this is how you can help me, and this is the signs that you might see happening. And I was very thorough. I was so thankful I did that. And at the first day of school, I drove over and went. And I'd been in the classroom about an hour and a half, very busy and excited. And I came to in the nurse's office.
Oh, my gosh.
The elementary school nurse's office. And she was very, very concerned. She'd never seen a diabetic have the situation I was in, and thought maybe there was something more wrong with me, and made an issue out of it with the college. And I ended up being told, this is an interesting story, ended up being told that I could not do my second student teaching situation, which would have been 8 weeks later. They let me complete every day for 8 weeks. I had no more problems. They let me do that, and then told me I couldn't go on to the next situation.
Oh, my gosh.
I don't think that would happen today.
It would definitely not happen today.
But I had very good people, help friends, the Dr. Williams in particular. He said, okay, we'll send you to a hospital to do a brainwave and to do some other tests, and we will prove to them that you have diabetes and it can be taken care of. So I went to the hospital, and after he did the brainwave, he came back, the doctor came in the room, and he said, why are you here? And I was sent to this particular one because my doctor knew that the state offices would recognize this doctor's name.
Very smart.
So he wrote a letter. My doctor wrote a letter. I was commuting still, and I wanted that degree. So I didn't do the second student teaching. They wouldn't allow me to. So I worked in stores and, made some money while I wasn't teaching or working. But I was determined I was going to finish up that last semester of school. And doing so, we had to write a thesis. And that meant meeting with the head of the education department, who happened to for this class. And so I had to meet with him to have my topic okay. And during that meeting, he sat there and told me that he was the one that marked down my A, that the student teacher and professors meeting with me in my situation of student teaching had given me an A, and I knew that, but my mark came out a B.
Huh.
Because of the head of the education department, because of my reaction in the school.
Wow.
And and so it was very difficult to finish up the semester with him.
Oh, that's horrible. So did you ultimately finish?
But
Yeah.
I did it. I learned to stand up for myself. So I finished the year out, which meant that now I was delayed in being certified because I hadn't done the second student teaching situation in math. And by that time, they had said, okay, you can do it. So I worked through the summer, and then I went 8 weeks, which I couldn't get a teaching job because I wasn't done with the student teaching. So I worked for 8 weeks, taught in the math department, 7th and 8th grade. And then now I'm in the middle of a first semester of school, and I'm done with my college. So I did substitute. And then I got a job in January, and then from then on, I taught for a few years and got married soon after. And the kids, we have 2 sons. Babies started coming along. I didn't teach for a while.
Let me just, before you go on to the next phase of life there, because certainly a lot to talk about. What was it like when you got that degree and got that first job? That must have been you must have had such a sense of accomplishment.
Oh yes, and the school that I did my student teaching for junior high math, they hired me to come back and teach, and that was even better because I already knew some people, knew people there from student teaching, and it was close. I could drive, and it was a real accomplishment. I think that I was able to do that, but I couldn't have done it on my own. I had to have other people help me.
It's such a hard lesson. I mean, to know that even with, people have more rights now, they are spelled out better, there's supposed to be laws and regulations, but it still happens. I mean, you still have to fight.
I imagine that you would. And then I remember many years later, in 1978, Dr. Williams Jr. Was one of the first doctors in the country to start up a home glucose monitoring program. And I think there were 8 or 10 of us adults that he put into this monitoring program, and the Ames company was making the glucose monitoring machines, and they loaned them to him to give to our small group. And we went in, I think it was twice a week. So he, out of his own private practice, set aside 2 days a week for just diabetics coming in the mornings, and we had graph paper to keep the numbers on from the machine, because the machine was like for a lab tech. It was the size of a cassette player, old cassette players, portable ones. It was that size, almost like a shoebox. And you had to have your own squirt bottle. You had to have your own timer. You had to have your own squirt bottle of water to wash the strip off after you put the drop of blood on there. You had to remove the blood and then get it into the machine, and then use the timer. And I think it was a plug-in.
Wow.
And
it probably seemed pretty cool at the time, though. I mean, that probably seemed like a big deal.
Oh, it was. And the technician at the doctor's office teaching me to do it, because I'd been math background, I said, "Oh, there's a delta symbol on that machine." So but it worked, and I was just amazed in how much better control you got right away. And my big deal was, I went out for lunch and I ordered pizza, and I was not ashamed. I would pick up, it was quite like under a card table or under a table at a restaurant. I would do the insulin injections in my stomach, and that's when I started doing that too. So I went back to Dr. Williams and I said, "Here's my report. I went out to lunch. I checked before. I checked after," and he was so excited that this had worked. He picked up the phone in my presence and called a doctor friend, and the first words out of his mouth were, "I told you they could learn to do this."
Wow!
And we did.
That's so interesting.
So then he hired me to work with him in the program two days a week. And I did that for, a year and a half or 2 years, and using my teaching background to help me. And then the patients would come in and meet me, and we'd go over their graph paper with their numbers on it and try to get them to understand why it went up or why it went down, so they got to study it themselves. And then I would summarize, and we'd go into the doctor together. And so anyway, that's how it worked, and it got better for me because of all the experience.
It's so interesting because it is just common practice and common sense now with type 1 that when you're diagnosed, they teach you how to use the tools, and they kind of send you home and say, they send you home and say, all right, good luck, here's all the stuff. But it's fascinating to see that when you're the time you're talking about, there was this feeling that perhaps patients couldn't do any of it.
That's right. And I've had adults call me, not within the last 2 or 3 years, and so maybe they have people in the doctor's offices, but they've called me knowing that I know how to do this, and they'll say, I was told I'm diabetic, or at least to go home and check my blood glucose. They gave me a machine, and I don't even know how to start with it.
Yeah, that's crazy. So also kind of remarkably for the time, if you don't mind me saying so, that you're living in, you had children, because I think a lot of people with type 1 were told not to at that time, right?
I'm not sure about that because I didn't know any other
good point.
diabetics. But it was suggested to me. I had no problems getting pregnant, and it was suggested to me not to have any more than 2 children. And I did have a miscarriage, so I did get pregnant more than twice. And I had both deliveries by C-section, cesarean.
Do you mind me asking if the pregnancies, were you okay, or did you have any issues?
Well, again, we didn't have the test equipment, on that. I had toxemia for both of them. Our first son was born 4 weeks early, and our second son was born 6 weeks early. And they did not have complications. And I had some lows during that time. I gained probably a little more weight than they would want you to, or that they would let you do now. And I was in the hospital for, I'd gone to the obstetrician on an appointment day and came home, and I had I was home going in for the appointment, and I had a nosebleed, and I couldn't get it to stop. And that's when they discovered I had toxemia, or they were watching it anyway. So they put me in the hospital early. I was there. And then Matthew, our second one, before he was born, I was in the hospital for, I think it was 7 days or 5 days before he was born. And then they kept me for a week for the C-section.
No.
But and Matthew being born 6 weeks early, he had to stay in the hospital for a month. And so I went back and forth every day.
I just think it's got to be so hard to be a mom with type 1, have little kids at that time, trying to take care of yourself, trying to take care of them. Was it as challenging as it sounds?
Well, I think that's probably why they said, only have 2.
I bet. As you then progress with this, the technology gets better, but it takes a while. Do you remember, I guess it was the 80s when they first had home meters that you could take home with you. Do you remember doing that?
In 1978, that's what I got from being on loan to the doctor, this big Ames.
Oh, okay, so that was that one.
Yeah, and it was made in Germany, and it cost $500, and insurance wouldn't cover anything towards any strips or anything. I don't think I had to buy the strips in the beginning either. While I was in Williams's program, I didn't. But it was a $500 program to get into, so that helped him pay for some of it. And I remember sitting down and saying, "Can we afford this?" And we finally decided we would find a way to do it because it may give me longer life and in a better, comfortable way. And so things have developed from then. And I remember Dr. Williams going over to Kodak, as a big manufacturing company of film, and that we're located in Rochester. And I remember him talking to Kodak people saying, "Look what this can do for your workers." Wow. Push the insurance companies.
So do you remember when you moved from that big shoebox size meter to something a little smaller?
Oh, it was a few years later, I know.
I'm just wondering if you were able to test more, or, were you able to check more? Did it make your life easier as that went on?
Yes, it did, certainly. The control was better. Well, you knew where you were.
Right, as opposed to not.
You're right. And the whole idea, the whole circumstances, you were keeping track. And that's when I started counting carbohydrates in 1978 and looking at nutrition boxes when they finally started putting that on. So that was all very helpful.
And when did insulin start changing? Because as you had said, you were on that first type of insulin, and then it became synthetic and changed. Did you do the long acting and the short, NPH and all that?
Yes, I did. But I can't. I have it someplace in my info.
Oh, it doesn't matter when. I'm just curious what the experience was
Yeah.
like for you. I mean, you've switched from what I would imagine was the very first iteration of insulin to the more recent ones, and now are you on? You mentioned Humalog. You're
Humalog.
on more modern.
I was on Novolog. I'm on Humalog now. And I did take Lantus, I think, for a while, in later years. And but I was always willing to do whatever they suggested. And they would, the doctors were just excellent. They were caring people, and they would explain, well, this is what's happening with your glucose, and so therefore this newer insulin we think will help. And I was willing to do it. I wasn't gung ho that's going to work today. And even today, it's not 100%. I don't have control numbers in 100% at all. It's up and down. It's very frustrating.
Do you use an insulin pump?
Yes, I do, and I've only had one for 8 years.
Which one do you use?
The Medtronic, I'm at the 523 now. I had the 522 for 4 years or 5 years. And I'm on an HMO insurance, so that deals with Medicare. They won't cover sensors, and so when I needed to get a new one, because the 522 was out of warranty or going out, Medicare would help. My insurance would help pay for it, and there were newer ones out with sensors involved, or would feed the info to the computer or to the pump. So I requested. It was a better one than 523, and they okayed coverage for the pump, but not the sensor.
And Medtronic sells it as a system, right? So that's really tough.
Well, yes, and now that's right. So I got the 523. I didn't get what I wanted.
Wow.
And the doctor does feel, because I don't always feel them coming on now.
Yeah.
But because I'm testing, I could test 7 to 10 times
Sure.
a day.
Sure.
In the night, I wake up, I set my alarm for 2 o'clock, and it helps me because I usually go to bed at 10 or 11. So that 4-hour span, if I've had to eat or had to take insulin, then that 4-hour span is a good time to take the test, because the insulin is used up, the active, that you've put in. And I try not to take in the insulin at night.
What was it like to switch to an insulin pump? You mentioned it was about 8. So you were about 8 years ago. You were in your mid-60s, I assume.
Mm-hmm.
What made?
Well, I'm going to be 70.
Oh, okay.
In December.
Okay, so you were just about to turn 70.
Right.
So my question is, I guess, what was it like, or what made you switch to an insulin pump when you had been doing, I assume, doing pretty well for a long time on multiple daily injections? I mean, you were about 70 when you switched to the insulin pump. What was that conversation like? What was the decision making like?
Well, my endocrinologist and primary, it was all in one doctor, and then I went to work for him in his office as a receptionist, so we were pals. He was suggesting that I should go on one, but I don't have diabetic complications from the disease, and so I thought, well, that's a lot of extra money, and insurance, coverage wasn't all that great. So, because we're paying privately, we're not with a group or under work situation. So I thought, well, I don't have to, and therefore I don't want to right now, but I was at a family wedding. My niece was diagnosed at the age of 12, and it was her son who was diagnosed at the age of 5 with type 1. They were all at the wedding, and he was now 6 years old. and he was at the table for breakfast, and I saw him pushing. I knew he had an insulin pump, and his mother did too, and he's pushing a clicking thing on the pump, and I said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "I'm putting in my carb count for breakfast."
Wow.
He was 6 years old. And I thought, okay, if he can do it, I can do it at 70. and I kept being told it will help you. You know, you'll know quicker what your glucose is and what you have to do. So that's really, honestly, the reason I got it.
That's fantastic.
And also because I was going high in the night, and there's a name for that, and I don't remember what it is.
Like the dawn phenomenon? Was it early in the morning?
It would be like between 3 and 7 o'clock. But the dawn effect. But I couldn't do anything about that with a syringe, and not knowing, time element when it was happening. And the pump helped with that, and I knew it would when I was, informed of it. So I was sitting talking to a diabetic nurse educator one day, and she said, "Oh, Medtronics is coming in to see me tomorrow with reps, and if you want to try a pump out this weekend, you can." And that put me into it, and I was very pleased I did.
Does your 6-year-old great-nephew know how influential he was in your pump decision?
Well, he knows the story. He may have forgotten it by now. He's looking at colleges.
Oh, gosh. Of course,
he's a
that's
senior
right.
in high school.
I'm still thinking of him as 6. It was 8 years ago. Oh, my goodness, that's funny. Is it difficult, though, to have a lot of people with type 1 in your family? I mean, a lot is a relative term, but, my son was the only one for a while. I have a second cousin who was diagnosed a few years later, but we don't really, we didn't think we had it in the family. What's that like?
Well, I guess I wasn't shocked with it when my niece was diagnosed, although she was the youngest of 5 children of my sisters, because I knew it could be passed on, certainly. My own children, one of them was, it's sad, but I remember writing a letter to Dr. Williams when I stopped working for him, how grateful I was for his care, and also that I was hopeful for the future of diabetics, because now we had these test machines. And everything that has come up since that time has just helped with control. And I also realized that even though you might have good control, you may still get the complications. And that's why I have volunteered. Have been part of the first group of 400 people at the Jocelyn Diabetic Center in Boston. I'm part of the 50-year medalist study. It's well known now. And that study was done to prove that some of us have genes that have helped us to live so long with diabetes. And now they have over 1,000 people in that research project. And they have also gotten labs and research being done in other countries about this and what they can do, and try to promote medications that would help those genes to work better for people.
Yeah, that Jocelyn Medalist group is pretty incredible. What's
Is.
it like for you to be in there and meet as you said, growing up, you knew that one guy at the Four Corners who you didn't know very well. What's it like to now know all of these people who are, in this really incredible group?
Oh, it is just wonderful. And some of the people at that Jocelyn started up a closed Facebook group for the 50-year medalists. And that is just wonderful. And we all would say probably, we don't know how we lived this long. I mean, I know that I had these lows, and I know I had these highs, and we all have our own experiences. It's just wonderful. And what's become of that original study, it's just expanded. And so now, many of us from that group have donated our bodies for research afterwards. That's another funny story. Dr. Burdett, I was talking to, and I came home from Jocelyn the first time, and I said to him, "Here's the form." I said, "I'm donating my body to to Jocelyn," and he said, "Judy, you've had diabetes so long, nobody's going to watch your body parts." I said, "No, it's for research purposes."
Sheesh. Hey, thanks a lot, Doc. That's really funny. In that, and I don't want to ask, don't tell us any secrets, but in that closed Facebook group, Many of us, as you listen, are in these groups, for parents of kids with type 1. I actually run one. I'm the admin for a local Facebook group for Charlotte area parents of type 1 kiddos. But there are a lot of them out there. I imagine that this one is very unique. Do you talk about things other than diabetes, or do you mostly just say, hey, how's everybody doing today, or what the kids up to? I'm just curious how it helps you.
There's a lot of talking about everything.
That's great.
I'm not on the computer as often as other people are. I just choose not to be. And so I have some closer people that have become closer to because of being in the 50-year group. And probably most of them are in their 60-year group, or having had it 60 years or more now. But there's a closeness to it. Jocelyn invites us back every 2 years, and they have programs, and we hear about what's up on the research every time we go, and that makes it interesting. They paid our way to go originally, but you pay your own way to go to these individual, these meetings every 2 years. Fortunately, our son lives near Albany, so we stay overnight and drive in and out that way, so it's not too costly for us to go. And there will be another one in 2017. It's just enlightening. And people will discuss. There's also Medtronics. He has a pump group. Is your child on a pump?
Yes, he uses the Animus Ping. Yes.
Okay. The Medicare, is he on a Medicare or not Medicare? Medtronic pump?
No, but there are closed groups for that pump as well.
Yeah.
So you can find people, who, if you have questions and that sort of thing, you can always find people.
And if you just don't feel if you feel lousy someday and put your name in there, you get lots of ego trips and help.
That's funny.
And I met a woman at Jocelyn in Boston, part of the research project, because we had a luncheon together one of the meetings, and this was after most of our research was done. I've been invited back to do other things, and so anyway, and she lives like a 20-minute trip from my house. And we never knew each other until this, and now we are very good friends, both she and her husband.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic.
So it is.
And you were recently awarded the 75-year Jocelyn Medal, and my understanding is that, your whole family was there. You, your kiddos, your grandchildren. What was that like?
Well, my husband didn't think I would ever be able to get all 11 of us there at once on the same day. I mean, our kids our 5 grandchildren are healthy kids, and they're all athletes, into sports, and it was difficult. But we got there, and the presentation was very well done. It was nicely done. The Dr. Park that is in charge of the research was unable to be there that day. He had another, appointment, and we went for other reasons too, but to be in Boston. It was just lovely, and I think I wanted my grandchildren to be there and to see the place and to have a little feel for it too, and that was wonderful. We got some nice pictures, and I was there a few years before that and saw them give an 80-year medal to a gentleman. And they have, as far as I know, at that point, they'd only given 3 of them out. So I told them when I left this time in August, when I went down, that I will be back in 5 years to get my 80 years.
Excellent. Excellent.
So I have a goal.
That's a good thing. I mean, a goal is always something that can help. I'm curious, when you stood there, and I'm seeing the pictures, I've surfed up some of the pictures from that award ceremony. What's going through your mind as you're surrounded by your family and holding up that medal? Do you remember what you were thinking?
Yes, I was very grateful and very thankful. It wasn't just me doing it. There's all these people standing around me helped. My parents, I was just, and so if you will allow me to, I will do my thank you to.
Please.
I said it there. Great thank you to God. There must be a reason I'm here so long, and this is another reason why I'm trying to reach out every day to help other diabetics just know that this can be done. So there's something more for me to be doing in life. And I thanked my parents and my sister It was an ordeal for them. My mother had 4 brothers in World War II, and along with me, and I have letters that they wrote to me from the service. So I was thankful to them and to my friends, because they used to carry things in their pockets. I didn't know that when we went on walking trips and stuff around the neighborhoods. And they always knew I might need something extra, so they were helping me, and had to at times. And the doctors, I've only had 5 doctors in that 75 years' time taking care of my insulin. One was immediately, into World War II, so he didn't remain very long with me. But the 2 Williamses did for many years, 30-some years. Dr. Burdett, I was with him 30-some years, and he retired and has died since in the last 5 years. And I've been at a new endocrinologist for 5 years. So I have each of them to thank. It's overwhelming to realize that you've done this, because you weren't expected to be living this long.
It's fantastic. And before I let you go, what is your message for someone who might be listening who was diagnosed just this year, who is thinking, how am I going to do this for the next 2 months, let alone the next 20 or 30 or 50 years?
Just be hopeful. Certainly there are things to help you. And don't expect it to be 100% of the time, or 100% control. At this point in time, I don't know anybody that's ever had that. But be hopeful. You make it through today. Maybe if your blood glucose numbers are not in the good control range, or the range that the doctor wants you to be in, you can learn to help that be better. And you can learn from it every day, and go to bed and be thankful you made it through the day. When you get up the next morning, be thankful right away that you have a new day to try, and just to try to get it to be better the second day. But let that day before that wasn't so good go by. It's gone. Just try to do your best, and try to do what's going to help you. And let people know that you have it. Don't hide it. You need help. People around you need to know how they can help you, and march on from there, and be hopeful. I was told when I was young there would be a cure. We don't have a cure yet, but look at all the things we have to help us. So reach out and grab that help if you need it, and smile. It helps.
Well, Judy, I cannot thank you enough for your great words, your terrific smile. Thanks for sharing your experience with us. I so appreciate it.
Well, thank you, and I hope we can keep in touch in some way.
You got it.
You're listening to Diabetes Connections with Stacy Sims.
More information on Judy and on the Jocelyn medalists, on the studies, I'll link it all up at diabetes-connections.com. And I need to include a follow-up thank you email that she sent to me, because she was concerned that she had missed someone in her thank yous. And I'm just going to read this email as it is, even though it repeats some of the people that she did thank. But she says she needs to thank God, her parents, her sister, her husband, 2 sons and their families, the 5 grandchildren, friends, and doctors, Dr. Hugh Fluke, Dr. John R. Williams Sr., John R. Williams Jr., Dr. Zane Burdett, and Dr. Rajamani. And I hope I'm pronouncing all of those right. And she said, please tell your son that I know it's frustrating, especially when you do all that you have been told to do and your blood sugar numbers don't show that. It takes a lot of time out of one's day, every day, but the disease is not going to go away, so think ahead for what you want to do or to be, and may I wish you good luck in the days ahead. Keep trying. And then she talks about, I don't know that we got to this in the interview, she volunteers at a diabetes camp run by the American Diabetes Association. She gives a lot of time to JDRF, fundraising for them as well. And next year marks 25 years for Judy being an in-home volunteer for hospice care. She says, life goes on, and I am part of it. Enjoy the day. How great is that? I hope that you have been as inspired as I have been by listening to Judy talk, by sharing her story. She's just great. I'm so lucky I get to talk to people like her. I am so thrilled that you're here to listen to that. If you'd like to hear more about people who have lived a long time with type 1, or you'd rather hear from, more from technical stuff, or you want more celebrities, let me know what you'd like to hear on Diabetes Connections. Drop me a line, Stacey at diabetes-connections.com. Follow on social media, lots of interaction there. Stacey Sims on Facebook and Twitter, Diabetes Connections on Facebook, and Diabetes CXN on Twitter. I'm also on Instagram, only one account, Stacey Sims, because it's just getting too complicated. And please subscribe wherever you are listening. If you're listening on Facebook or on the website, that's great. But if you're listening on a phone app or on your mobile device, please make sure you subscribe to the show so you never miss an episode. And when you subscribe, you actually get them a little earlier, just a few hours, than on Facebook or online. And leave a review if you like what you hear. Love to hear what you're thinking about the show. And please go ahead and share the newsletter, if you're signed up for the newsletter, with someone touched by diabetes. That's a really great way to share the show and information, because when you share the newsletter, you're sharing all the links that go along with it as well. All right, next week, I'm going to be talking about 10 years with type 1 in my family. The first weekend of December marks our diagnosis day, our diaversary. And that's going to be an interesting discussion. So I hope you join us for our look back at a decade with type 1. I'm Stacey Sims, and I'll see you back here next week.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacey Sims Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.